June 1953. Moscow had not yet recovered from the events of March, from the death of the leader whose name had been spoken for decades with a mixture of fear and reverence. There was an unspoken tension in the air. The government, which yesterday had seemed monolithic, now resembled cracked ice, and each of Stalin's heirs was trying to secure his position on his own ice floe. The most powerful and dangerous figure was Lavrenti Beria, the all-powerful head of the combined Ministry of Internal Affairs and State Security. He held compromising information on everyone, and his people permeated all structures of the state. On 26 June, a meeting of the Presidium of the Council of Ministers was held in the Kremlin. Beria, confident in his power, behaved in a relaxed, even arrogant manner, unaware that the foundations beneath him were already shaking. Nikita Khrushchev, not yet the sole leader but the most active of the conspirators, had made prior arrangements with the military. The main executor of his plan was to be a man whose name was known throughout the country, Marshal Georgy Zhukov, First Deputy Minister of Defense. At the agreed time, at Khrushchev's signal, the door to the meeting room swung open. Zhukov stood in the doorway, and behind him was a group of combat generals, including future Marshal Kirill Moskalenko. Their faces were impenetrable, their movements precise and decisive. These were not party functionaries accustomed to backroom deals, but men who gave and carried out orders on which the lives of millions depended. "Hands up!" Zhukov's voice sounded firm, without a shadow of doubt. Beria, stunned for a second, reached for his briefcase. Accustomed to arresting others, he could not believe what was happening. But the marshal stopped him. "As Deputy Minister of Defense, I order you not to move." At that moment, it was the military hierarchy, not the party hierarchy, that prevailed. The resistance was broken. The all-powerful People's Commissar was led out of the hall, and his political career, and with it his life, came to an end. This arrest, carried out with military precision, marked the peak of Zhukov's political influence. He acted not simply as an executor, but as a guarantor that the army supported the new configuration of power. He eliminated the most dangerous figure, clearing the way for Khrushchev to rise to the top. It seemed that now all doors were open to the marshal. But this was where the main secret of his failed ascent lay. Zhukov was a genius of war, but an amateur in politics. The Soviet system of power was structured in such a way that real power belonged not to government posts, but to the party structure. The supreme ruler was not the chairman of the Council of Ministers, but the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This power was based not on personal authority or popularity among the people, but on control over the party apparatus. A gigantic network of secretaries of regional and district committees who were the real masters in the localities. Zhukov was an outsider in this system. He thought in terms of orders, fronts, and divisions. His world was black and white. If there was an order, it had to be carried out. Party life, on the other hand, consisted of halftones, hints, complex alliances, and behind-the-scenes intrigues. The marshal did not have his own clientele. A network of party workers loyal to him, which Khrushchev, Malenkov, and Molotov had built up over decades. His authority was enormous, but it was personal, not systemic. He was respected and feared in the army, but in the corridors of the Central Committee on Staraya Square, he was just a famous general, one of many. Even when he was appointed to the Presidium of the Central Committee, the highest party body, in 1956, he remained an outsider there. His direct, Sometimes harsh judgments clashed with the insinuating and flowery manner of communication of the old party members. He did not understand and probably despised this game, considering it empty chatter. They, in turn, saw him not as an ally, but as a crude, unpredictable force, a dangerous tool that helped them today, but could turn against them tomorrow. This gratitude, however, was mixed with a thick, sticky fear. The members of the Presidium, themselves flesh and blood of Stalin's system, remembered very well what happened when any of their comrades became too powerful. And Zhukov was not just a comrade in arms. He was a representative of another parallel power, the power of the army. And the precedent he had set was frightening. If today generals arrest one party leader on the orders of another, what will prevent them from arresting them all on their own initiative tomorrow? This unspoken question hung in the air in the Kremlin. Khrushchev's gratitude was sincere, but momentary. The fear of his colleagues was deep and systemic. They saw Zhukov not as a savior, but as a man who had clearly demonstrated that a party card and a high position in the Central Committee were nothing in the face of a few determined men in military uniform. Moreover, the old guard had a good memory. They had not forgotten the end of the 1940s and the so-called trophy affair. Then, immediately after the war, at the height of his glory, Zhukov had already been sent by Stalin into humiliating exile. First to command the Odessa military district, and then the Ural military district. The formal reason was accusations of illegal appropriation of trophies from Germany. Train cars full of furniture, paintings, and valuables. But the real reason was different. Stalin, who was pathologically afraid of any competition, saw the marshal's popularity as a threat to his sole power. He could not allow a second leader to emerge in the country, a hero whose name the people pronounced with no less reverence than his own. And so, in 1946, the party apparatus, obedient to the will of its master, easily put the famous commander in his place. This lesson was learned by all. The system had already shown once that it was stronger than anyone, even the greatest soldier. And now, in 1953, Stalin's comrades, looking at Zhukov, remembered not only his triumph in Berlin, but also his humiliation in Moscow. They understood that this man was dangerous and that they needed to be on their guard. 4 years passed. During this time, Zhukov, who became Minister of Defense in 1955, threw himself headlong into his familiar element, reforming the army. He was a man of the new atomic age. He understood that the multi-million-strong infantry armies of the Great Patriotic War were becoming a thing of the past. The future belonged to missile forces, mobile, well-equipped units, and nuclear weapons. With his characteristic energy and rigor, he began to reshape the armed forces. Outdated branches of the military were reduced, and the focus was placed on the latest technologies. He personally supervised the famous Trotsky exercises of 1954, where military exercises were conducted with the actual use of nuclear weapons. This event, on the one hand, showed the world the increased power of the USSR, and on the other, demonstrated Zhukov's own style, achieving goals at any cost, with complete disregard for the possible consequences for the health of thousands of soldiers who passed through the epicenter of the atomic mushroom cloud. but his main reformist activity unfolded in the sphere of management. And it was here that he crossed the fatal line. The cornerstone of the party's control over the army had always been the institution of political workers, commissars, deputy political officers, and members of military councils. These people, who wore epaulets, were essentially the eyes, ears, and mouth of the Central Committee and the troops. They monitored morale, carried out ideological work, and had the right to interfere in the decisions of commanders. The main political administration of the Soviet Army and Navy, Glavpur, was, in essence, a branch of the CPSU Central Committee within the Ministry of Defense. Zhukov, as a professional military man, considered this system cumbersome, ineffective, and undermining the principle of unity of command. He believed that a commander should command, not look over his shoulder at the political officer. He began to consistently limit the influence of political organs, insisting that the main task of the army was combat training, not studying the works of the classics of Marxism-Leninism. This was a direct attack on the Holy of Holies, the leading role of the party. The Central Committee was flooded with denunciations and complaints from political workers of all ranks. They wrote that the Minister of Defense was belittling the role of the party, promoting a cult of personality, and promoting people loyal to him personally, rather than to the cause of communism, to command posts. Every harsh word he uttered, every order that overturned a decision made by a political body, was carefully recorded and landed on the desks in the offices on Staraya Square. The party's chief ideologist at the time was Mikhail Suslov, a dry, ascetic dogmatist for whom the purity of the party line was more important than anything else in the world. It was he who became the main collector of compromising information on the marshal, seeing in his actions not just arbitrariness, but dangerous heresy of Bonapartism. And then came June 1957. This moment became the second peak of Zhukov's political career, and at the same time, the beginning of the end. The old Stalinist guard, Molotov, Malenkov, Kaganovich, seeing that Khrushchev was gaining too much power and deviating from the correct Stalinist course, decided to remove him. At a meeting of the Presidium of the Central Committee, they obtained a majority, 7 votes to 4. Khrushchev was effectively deposed. It seemed that his fate was sealed, but he would not have been Khrushchev if he had given up. He stalled for time, demanding that a plenary session of the Central Committee be convened, where he had more supporters. And then Zhukov came back on the scene. He did not just utter his famous phrase about tanks. He took action. As Minister of Defense, he gave orders to the military transport aviation. Across the country, military aircraft began to urgently pick up members of the Central Committee, secretaries of regional committees from Siberia, the Far East, and Ukraine, and deliver them to Moscow. It was an unprecedented logistical operation carried out with military efficiency. While the conspirators in the Kremlin were trying to formalize their victory on paper, dozens of people who owed their careers to Khrushchev flocked to the capital. Zhukov did not just save Khrushchev, he did the unthinkable. He pitted the army, as an organized force, against the highest party body, the Presidium of the Central Committee. He clearly demonstrated that the decision of a handful of people in the Kremlin office was worthless if the army was on the side of their opponents. This came as a shock to the party elite. They realized that their power, which they considered absolute and granted by history itself, was in fact conditional. Today, Zhukov saved Khrushchev. But what about tomorrow? Who would he decide to support or overthrow tomorrow? He proved himself to be not just a minister, but a true kingmaker. And with that, he signed his own death warrant. Khrushchev, having consolidated his power after the defeat of the anti-party group, was forced to make a choice. On the one hand, he owed everything to Zhukov. On the other, he was the first secretary of the party, a product and guardian of the system, and the system demanded that he prove his primacy. To leave in the post of Minister of Defense, a man who could decide the fate of the party leadership at his own discretion, meant living on a powder keg. Neither he nor his entourage could allow this. The denouement came quickly, just 4 months later. In October 1957, Zhukov was sent on an official visit to Yugoslavia and Albania. This was a classic Soviet political move, to remove an undesirable figure from the capital in order to strike him in the back. While the marshal was meeting with Marshal Tito, a plenary session of the Central Committee was being prepared in Moscow under the leadership of Suslov and Khrushchev himself. There was only one item on the agenda: on the work of Comrade G.K. Zhukov, Minister of Defense. When Zhukov's plane landed at the Moscow airport, he was not greeted with honors, but almost like a prisoner. He was immediately taken to a meeting of the Presidium where the charges were read to him. He was stunned. He tried to object, talking about his merits and how he had always been loyal to the party, but the machine had already been set in motion. The next day, the plenum began. It was a terrible sight. One after another, people who had sought his favor just yesterday, his comrades in arms, marshals of the Soviet Union, took to the podium, and they repented, condemned, and denounced him. His closest ally in the war, Marshal Konyev, delivered the main speech, accusing Zhukov of promoting a cult of personality, of rudeness, of seeking to separate the army from the party. Marshal Rokossovsky, whom Zhukov had once saved from the torture chambers of the NKVD, also spoke. Generals who owed their careers to him also spoke. It was a ritual of party ostracism, where personal relationships and past merits were of no importance. The system demanded public flogging, and it got it. The accusations were carefully selected. They reminded him of everything: his sharpness in communication, his desire to rewrite the history of the war, emphasizing his own role, and, most importantly, his reforms in the army. What he considered to be bringing order and increasing combat effectiveness was presented as a malicious attempt to seize power, as Bonapartism. The plenum's resolution stated, prone to adventurism both in his understanding of the tasks of the USSR's foreign policy and in his leadership of the Ministry of Defense. That was the end. Khrushchev, whom Zhukov had saved twice, not only failed to stand up for him, he was one of the main orchestrators of this process. For him, it was not an act of personal ingratitude, but a political necessity. By removing Zhukov, he solved several problems at once. He reassured the party apparatus, proving that no one was above the party. He got rid of a minister who was too powerful and independent. And finally, he removed a vivid reminder of his own vulnerability and of those to whom he owed his power. So why did Zhukov not become the ruler of the USSR? The answer is simple and complex at the same time. He did not become a ruler because he did not want to be one in the sense that the Kremlin understood it. He was a soldier, not a schemer. He could have seized power by force, but he did not know what to do with it within the party system. Most importantly, the system itself rejected him as a foreign body. The secret that was hidden after Stalin's death was not some specific conspiracy against the marshal. It lay in the nature of Soviet power itself, which was terrified of any uncontrollable force, be it a popular commander, an independent writer, or a free artist. Zhukov was too great, too popular, and too independent for this system, and it crushed him, just as it crushed anyone who tried to place themselves above it. He was dismissed from all his posts. The greatest military leader of the 20th century ended his days in exile at his dacha, dictating his memoirs, which would then be torn apart and corrected for many years by party censors trying to fit his gigantic figure into the Procrustean bed of official history. This fear of the man with a gun was not just a situational fear of a particular marshal for the party leadership. It had deep historical and ideological roots, going back to the times of the Great French Revolution and the birth of the term Bonapartism itself. The Bolsheviks, as diligent students of history, remembered well how General Bonaparte, the hero of the Revolutionary Wars, ultimately dispersed the Directory and proclaimed himself first consul and then emperor, burying the republic he had sworn to defend. This historical specter had haunted them since 1917. The figure of Lev Trotsky, the creator of the Red Army, was in many ways the first projection of this fear. His authority in the army during the Civil War was enormous, and it was precisely the accusations of striving for personal dictatorship, of that very Bonapartism, that became one of the main tools in his persecution by Stalin and his allies. The party always jealously ensured that the army remained only an armed detachment of the party, and not an independent force. Any popular military leader automatically came under suspicion. Zhukov, with his unprecedented fame as the Marshal of Victory, was the ideal, almost textbook embodiment of the Bonapartist threat for this system. His popularity among the people was not just great. It was of a different nature than the popularity of party leaders. Their authority was a function of their position, while his was the result of real victories visible to all. People hung his portraits in their homes alongside those of Stalin, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. And this frightened the party ideologues to the point of trembling. It should be understood that the fears of the party elite were fueled not only by theoretical fears, but also by very specific traits in Zhukov's character and behavior. He was a completely undiplomatic man. His bluntness, bordering on rudeness, became legendary. At meetings, where it was customary to speak in hints and vague formulations, he would interrupt high-ranking party officials and say, "What nonsense are you talking about? This is how it should be done." He did not recognize any authority except professional ones. For him, a gray-haired member of the Presidium of the Central Committee who knew nothing about military strategy was simply a bureaucrat who was getting in the way. This manner of behavior, effective on the front lines, where quick and clear decisions were required, was suicidal in the viscous atmosphere of Kremlin intrigue. He did not create alliances, he created tension. Everyone he publicly humiliated, or whose opinion he ignored, became his secret enemy, patiently waiting for the moment to take revenge. And that moment came at the October 1957 plenum. People who had been harboring resentment for years were given the opportunity to speak their minds. They accused him of arrogance, of disregarding the opinions of the military councils, where party representatives sat. In essence, they took revenge on him for his efficiency and for making them feel incompetent. In addition, the system had another, much more powerful lever against him than just memories of his character. These were the state security archives. After Beria's arrest, control of the organs passed to Khrushchev's people. The new structure, the Committee for State Security, KGB, headed by Ivan Serov, continued to do what it had always done: gather information on everyone. And there was a thick file on Marshal Zhukov, started back under Stalin. It contained all his careless remarks, conversations in small circles where he could criticize certain decisions made by the leadership. There were statements extracted from his colleagues during the trophy case and the aviation case. Agents in the army carefully reported on the mood among the officers and the growing authority of the Minister of Defense. Thus, by 1957, Khrushchev and Suslov had in their hands not just abstract accusations of Bonapartism, but concrete, documented compromising material that could be used at any moment. They knew who he was meeting with, what he was talking about, and who was in his inner circle. Zhukov, a master of military intelligence, found himself completely defenseless against political intelligence. He acted openly, while an invisible web was being spun around him. It is also important to understand the marshal's own motivation. Did he really want to become the sole ruler of the USSR? Most likely not. His ambitions lay elsewhere. He wanted to create the army of his dreams, the most modern, the most powerful, the most combat-ready in the world. And he wanted to be the absolute master of this army, without having to answer to party controllers, whom he considered amateurs. His ideal was not absolute political power, but absolute military power, removed from the petty control of the party.
He sought to turn the Ministry of Defense into a kind of state within a state, where the laws of military discipline and professionalism prevailed, rather than party directives. This was his main mistake, and the main threat to the system. The party could put up with anything: economic failures, the cult of personality, repression. But it could never put up with the emergence of an alternative center of power beyond its control. Zhukov's desire for autonomy for the army was perceived as an attempt at a slow-motion coup d'etat. Their reasoning was simple. Today, he would remove the army from party control, and tomorrow, this army, loyal to him personally, would remove the party itself from the Kremlin. The international aspect should not be overlooked either. Zhukov was the only Soviet military commander whose name was widely known and respected in the West. His joint work with Eisenhower, Montgomery, and de Lattre de Tassigny in the Control Council in Berlin earned him a reputation as someone with whom dialogue was possible. Life magazine put his portrait on its cover. Dwight Eisenhower, who had by then become President of the United States, treated him with undisguised sympathy. In the context of the emerging Cold War, such an independent international reputation was not an asset, but a liability for the Kremlin. It made Zhukov too unpredictable a figure. Who knows what contacts he could have established, what negotiations he could have conducted behind the backs of the Foreign Ministry and the Central Committee. For the Soviet system, accustomed to speaking to the world with a single monolithic voice, the very possibility of an alternative channel of communication was unacceptable. His fame in the West became another point in the unspoken indictment. And so, after the humiliating plenum, his last and longest battle began. The battle for his own memory. He was sent into exile, which was officially called retirement. He lived in a dacha in Sosnovka, effectively under house arrest. He was constantly monitored, and his rare contacts were tracked.
But his main task was to write his memoirs, memories and reflections. It was his attempt to tell his truth about the war and his life. The manuscript became the subject of a fierce struggle. It was demanded for review by the Central Committee and the main political administration of the army. Censors in plain clothes and in uniform deleted entire chapters, inserted paragraphs about the leading role of the party and the wisdom of the high command, belittled the role of some generals and glorified others, depending on the current political situation. Everything related to the repressions in the army before the war, the failures of the first period of the war, and his conflicts with the political leadership was particularly harshly censored. He resisted fiercely, arguing over every phrase, every comma. Sometimes he managed to defend something, but more often than not, he was forced to give in. The book, published in 1969, was no longer entirely his book. It was a compromise, the result of an exhausting struggle between a lone, disgraced marshal and a faceless ideological machine. And even in this form, it became an event. But the true story of his rise and fall, the full depth of the tragedy of a man who won the most terrible war for his country, but found himself powerless against the intrigues of those he had saved, only became known decades later, when the very system that had created him and then rejected him collapsed. This systemic jealousy of the army manifested itself in small ways, which, like drops of water, wore away at the rock of his position. For example, Zhukov initiated a review of outdated award practices. He considered it unfair that officers in rear headquarters received the same combat medals for their years of service as frontline soldiers received for their actual exploits. The marshal insisted on the establishment of new medals for impeccable service to distinguish between combat and peaceful merits. Party orthodoxy immediately saw this as a cunning plan to belittle the role of career military personnel who did not participate in combat but formed the backbone of the party's support in the troops. Every such step, aimed, in Zhukov's opinion, at strengthening justice and morale, was interpreted by the Central Committee as an attempt to create a caste of special frontline soldiers loyal to him personally, as opposed to party officers. Another source of irritation was his cultural policy in the army. The marshal actively supported the creation of the Soviet Army Song and Dance Ensemble and the Grekov Studio of military artists, seeking to raise the prestige of military service through art. But here, too, he acted in his own way. He could personally approve the repertoire, preferring heroic songs about war and soldierly valor to dry ideological propaganda. This independence in a sphere that the party considered its domain, ideology, caused deep irritation. In the report, the conspiracy against him was fueled not only by the fear of party members, but also by deep envy among the marshals themselves. Many commanders, no less talented but less favored by national glory, such as Konyev or Malinovsky, secretly resented his authoritarian style and his unchallenged position as first marshal. The 1957 plenum became a legal opportunity for them to settle old scores from the front lines and headquarters and vent their pent-up resentment. The specific accusations were damning. He was accused of promoting his own cult in military academies, where detailed study of Zhukov's operations was beginning to replace the analysis of classical military doctrines, and even Marxist-Leninist teachings on war. For Khrushchev, it was also a personal liberation. The figure of Zhukov, the savior and true hero, constantly reminded Nikita Sergeyevich of his own, much more modest role in the war. By removing the marshal, he got rid of an eternal, silent creditor and established himself as the sole, undisputed leader of the country, owing his rise to no one. Thus, Zhukov did not become the ruler of the USSR, not because of personal failures, but because of the rigid framework of party dictatorship. His story reminds us that in that system, even the most heroic figures could not surpass the apparatus of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The secret that was hidden after Stalin was the very nature of power, where the military remained an instrument